So in second year of university, I was in one of my first painting classes, and we talked about the meaning of art, what kind of art is good, what kind of art is even worth making. As per usual, when talking about art and the meaning of art and why we make it, we always end up talking about, well, life and the meaning of life and why we do anything. Because looking for a justification for an urge to make something is the same as trying to find a justification for, I don't know, wanting to live. So when we started talking about the meaning of life, of course, one of the first things that came up was nihilism and existentialism. We gotta talk about what is even existentialism. Well, it's just basically knowing that you have free will and you determine your life and your decisions and how you lead it. Blah blah blah. Nihilism, on the other hand, is actually really easy to explain, especially with absurdism as a foil. We talked about the fact that life doesn't really have inherent meaning, which is something I agreed with, but then I said that I don't really feel like this is something that we need to be depressed about. We can just kind of vibe. And obviously this is a very easy and basic way to describe absurdism, knowing about the fact that there is no meaning, but also acknowledging that people, just human beings, want that meaning. However, absurdism suggests that we should just basically stop looking for it because it's kind of pointless. When I said in class that I think that we shouldn't be sad about it or anything like that, I remember that one of the girls in class told me that I should read The Myth of Sisyphus and look into Albert Camus in general. And I said, thank you. And then I forgot about it because I just cannot for the life of me remember any names or anything until I stumble upon it myself once again at a time where I actually have time to look into it. At the time, I definitely thought that it made sense that she told me to read it because a lot of my thoughts fell under this philosophy. When I read The Myth of Sisyphus, I kind of thought that there's a lot, that I did agree with. It kind of worked for me. However, there was a couple of things that I was kind of not sure about because of logical inconsistencies in the writing. And then recently I decided to read The Outsider. I got questions and I got notes, okay? And I have a different opinion on absurdism altogether. The reason why The Outsider by Albert Camus is even in this conversation is because, yes, The Myth of Sisyphus talks about absurdism in its purest form. Its theory, it is explaining the absurd. It is important to mention that the absurd and absurdism are two different things. Something being absurd in terms of not making a lot of sense technically has the same meaning with absurdism, but it's not a philosophical idea. Absurdism includes a lot of different little notes that make it what it is. So it's not exactly a one-to-one from the meaning that we usually use. I want to give you a little bit of an idea of what this story is even about. This book is basically about a guy who is like the ideal representation of an absurd man. Absurd as in the philosophical concept. He basically does a bunch of random shit and then commits murder at the end. That is kind of senseless and not kinda, it is senseless. And he gets a death sentence. Even just starting with the translator's note, it is quite strange that none of these people, not the translator, not Camus himself, not Jean-Paul Sartre when he was talking about this in one of his essays, which we're also going to cover, that none of them realize that Meursault is not really a great idea. He's not a really great character to portray this concept because I personally think that he is none of the things that they are describing. For example, let's start with the fact that the translator says, despite appearances though, neither Camus nor Meursault ever tried to make things simple for themselves. I need you to remember Meursault, a character, the main character of The Stranger or The Outsider, whichever translation you're reading. The book starts with his mom dying. He has the weirdest reaction to it. He does not feel any particular way. He does not feel bad nor good. He does not have any complicated feelings about her in general. He does not really think about how they lived before he sent her to a home. There's nothing personal about Meursault in a way of his relationship with his mother. If it did anything for him, if it informed him in any way. One of the first ideas that we are introduced to in this book is that all things are merely things that we are used to. Camus suggests that the reason why Meursault's mom was really upset about him moving her to a home and then she stopped being upset about it is because her routine changed. When she was at home with me, Maman used to spend her time following me with her eyes, not saying a thing. For the first few days she was at the home, she cried a lot, but that was because she wasn't used to it. A few months later, and she would have cried if she'd been taken out. She was used to it. That's partly why I didn't go there much this past year, and also because it took up my Sunday, not to mention the trouble of getting on the bus, buying tickets, and spending 2 hours traveling. This idea of people only feeling negative feelings about losing something being related to habit is continuously brought back up in this book. There is truth to it to a certain degree. Yes, we feel the loss of someone who we're close to, who we see every single day and who we have interactions with every single day a lot more than someone we barely see. I believe that Camus was trying to establish the fact that Meursault doesn't really care that he's supposed to feel a certain way about his mother passing. He just doesn't feel any way because she was not part of his everyday life anymore. However, it's just not how human psyche works. It seems like they are forgetting that there are a lot of different things that change in your life consistently. Routines don't stay routines for long, and people don't stick around for long either, not because they are leaving per se, but because, well, they die sometimes. There's another thing about Meursault's mother and the way that people talk about her. When you look into Sartre, damn, that's a name. When you look into Sartre's writing on Camus and on The Outsider, there is this part where it says, and he probably did not go see her often because it wasted his Sunday, not to speak of the effort involved in getting to the bus, buying tickets, and taking a 2-hour trip, which is the quote that the end of the quote that I just read to you. Then he continues to say, if the desire is there, it will be strong enough to make the sluggard run at a full speed to jump onto a moving truck. But he still calls his mother by the tender childish name of Mama, and he never misses a chance to understand her and identify himself with her. And I want to disagree with Sartre so vehemently here, because what the fuck do you mean he tried to understand her or feel any particular way about it? What do you mean? Where does he do that? Because the thing is, he brings up his mother more at the end of the story because, well, he's already waiting for the execution, and he starts thinking about how she lived her last years at the home. First and foremost, she wasn't that old. She was only 60 or around 60 because Meursault doesn't even know her age. This is ridiculous. Sartre and Camus are trying to get everyone to see that he's not bad or good. There's no morality to his actions. It's all more about just pure decision making in the moment about whether to do something or not, and it is purely based on his do I want to do this or not kind of attitude, which is really strange to me because it becomes very difficult to differentiate it from hedonism, and they definitely want people to think that they're two different things, yet they consistently write in analysis of The Outsider and in The Outsider things that contradict it. My issue with Meursault's logic is just that he lacks any. If all experiences are equal, desire doesn't really matter. You could do something you wanted to do and something you didn't want to do, and if these two things are equal, your desire is not a legitimate drive. There's a passion of the absurd. The absurd man will not he wants to live without relinquishing any of his certainty, without a future, without hope, without illusion, and without resignation either. He stares at death with passionate attention, and this fascination liberates him. He experiences the divine irresponsibility of the condemned man. It is constantly reiterated that an absurd man has a passion for living. That is why he does not die or kill himself. Where is that passion? It doesn't matter on a fundamental level what anyone chooses. They can even remove morality out of the question entirely and still end up with the same issue. If you have enough passion to live, you should have enough of it to choose. What do they mean by passion, if not will? what do they mean by passion if not a feeling? If feeling isn't present and replaced by surface level body sensations, there is not enough to stay alive when sensations are not pleasurable. This logic is pulling too much from hedonism while rejecting it because of its directionality. Like, there is a purpose to a hedonist pleasure and, avoiding pain, reducing pain, whatever it is. Absurdism wants you to have no direction because direction is too synonymous with meaning. This limp passion that he has, by he I mean Marceau, for anything and everything is decontextualized and honestly impotent, not just in asserting or suggesting a meaning, but in giving enough to even power someone through one singular day. No, to me, it's not horrific that he didn't act sad about his mother's death. It's horrific that he felt nothing about it inside, and I don't mean sadness. And we can say what he felt inside or thought inside because we were inside his head in this book. We're not judging his external behavior. We're not judging based on some societal norm that everyone should love their mother, but rather on the simple observation that his behavior is decontextualized from the rest of his life. He felt nothing, and this is more important, he thought nothing of it. Just listen to this assertion of the audience's experience by Sartre. One experience is as good as another. The important thing is simply to acquire as many as possible. Confronted with this quantitative ethic, all values collapse. He is innocent. Innocent as Somerset Maugham savages before the arrival of the clergyman who teaches them good and evil, what is lawful and what is forbidden. For this man, everything is lawful. He is as innocent as Prince Mishkin, who lives in an everlasting present, lightly tinged with smiles and indifference. And now we fully understand the title of Camus' novel. The outsider he wants to portray is precisely one of those terrible innocents who shock society by not accepting the rules of its game. And we ourselves, who on opening the book are not yet familiar with the feeling of the absurd, vainly try to judge him according to our usual standards. This is so profoundly stupid. I don't even sometimes, no offense to Sartre, I'm pretty sure he's written a lot of things that I'm going to read in the future and gain something from and whatever, but these two guys really would have benefited from somebody who is not a man maybe, or not a privileged person, somebody who maybe knows how to question the logic in the text. They would have definitely benefited from them reading it, because come on now, what Marceau is guilty of is not being a person, that's all. And it's not me saying it in a way of like people who commit heinous crimes when you don't understand why they like causing pain to others, right? I specifically mean that he isn't a person because he isn't written like one. I can't call him bad or good, not because he isn't doing anything that's bad or good, because he's done plenty of bad and nothing good. One of the things that he's done that is a positive thing, in quotations, of helping somebody, was actually writing a letter for Raymond that would bring a woman that Raymond broke up with and been beating up for a while now to get her to his apartment. He's helping, in quotations, Raymond, but he's definitely not doing a good thing. So he hasn't done honestly anything good in the entirety of the book. So technically speaking, in basic layman terms of morality, I can call him a bad person. However, in this case in particular, when I'm talking about not seeing him as a bad or a good person, it doesn't mean that I'm not judging his actions. It's just that I don't think that a person, any person, can be so decontextualized. You cannot possibly be having a good relationship with someone like your parents for your entire life and then not feel or think or be confronted with something when they die. That just doesn't happen. You can have a bad relationship with them, and when they die, you're still gonna have some kind of feelings and thoughts about it. You can simply not know them and then be told that this happened, and you'll still have some kind of feelings and thoughts about it. Maybe not thoughts and feelings that people would want you to have, but you would still have them. And the most ridiculous thing about this is saying, and we ourselves, who on opening the book are not yet familiar with the feeling of the absurd, vainly try to judge him according to our usual standards. Jean-Paul, please tell me, how old do you think those people are? And I'm sure this is an experience for many people. This is not like me being like, oh my god, I was such a gifted child. I think this is pretty normal, actually, that you have your first feeling of absurdity when you first find out about death, about fear, about irrational emotions, and being confronted with the response of your parents or people around you in regards to that. It's going to happen before the age of like 8. I remember distinctly being very upset about it when I was about 4 or 5 years old, when I found out that, well, when we die, we just die. And I mean, my brother, he like lied to me afterwards, being like, no, Lisa, we become stars, whatever the fuck. And like, I also went to religious school afterwards, and it still didn't stick. It still wasn't enough. It wasn't a consolation of any sort. So what is he talking about? You know what's funny? If you're not completely stuck in this one idea of what is normal, even culturally speaking, okay, you're not going to even pick up some of the weird Merceau behaviors as quickly as some people would. For example, yes, it's weird that he doesn't know his mother's age, or he doesn't know like when she died exactly. He doesn't feel anything about it, whatever. Yes, it's weird. But when I first read it, I just assumed that he had a bad relationship with her. When I read the part where he was sitting in the room with the coffin and the body, and they were just like sitting the entirety of the night, like they weren't doing anything, just sitting there. And then it turned out during the trial, at the end of the book, they say that it was like so disrespectful that he had a cigarette to smoke and had a coffee. Bitch, how is that disrespectful? I don't understand. Why are you even sitting there for the entirety of the night? This is what I'm telling you about the fact that neither Sartre nor Camus realized that these things are easily confronted, not just by people behaving strangely. Sometimes you just notice it because you just meet somebody who isn't literally you. Literally anybody of any other culture or any other religion. All of these judgments that I'm spewing here right now, it's purely based on the myth of Sisyphus, The Outsider, and Jean-Paul Sartre writing about Camus' The Outsider. When I thought about absurdism before I read The Outsider, but I have read The Myth of Sisyphus, I thought that the absurd, being confronted with it, was with how chaotic, unlawful, weird existence is. How things just don't make sense at all. There's no karma, there's no nothing, you know? This feeling of uneasiness, I thought that that was the absurd, you know? The fact that we do need that meaning to feel comfortable, but we kind of have to make do without it. If the myth of Sisyphus is theory, then The Outsider is its application. Before, my idea of the absurd was exactly about the fact that it's just existence is absurd. It didn't come with the baggage of, well, now I can do whatever the fuck I want if I don't get punished for it by karma, God, whatever the fuck. Well, in actuality, I've never been doing things or avoiding or restricting myself from doing bad things for the sake of God, even when I was a believer, because I was always restricting myself from those things because it made me feel shitty doing those things to people. That's it. So what are we talking about here? I genuinely do not understand how they can just drop this idea that if God doesn't exist and we all die, then everything is permissible. What do you mean? Is this how you were living this entire time? Not doing heinous shit just because you were afraid of a little bit of hellfire after? Okay, maybe not a little bit, like the whole point is that it's forever, but seriously, that's what it was? That's a little pathetic, if I do say so myself.
The funniest thing is that their approach to absurdism and nihilism is the same as male actors approaching method acting, you know? No one ever does a bunch of good or considerate things because nothing matters. It's basically just a license to kill for them instead of a license to do something decent or to make the only thing that's real to them, the current moment, more tolerable, just nicer in one way or another for everyone. Yeah, for no reason, not for a cookie in heaven. It's literally always the same argument. It's like, well, I'm method acting. And it's always method acting of being a dickhead. It's the same thing with absurdism and nihilism. It attracts a lot of people who say nothing matters because they want basically a free for all kind of situation happening. Because why the hell do they not do nice things just because it doesn't matter? They always have the energy and the passion for life to do something shitty. This is what is so funny about this, and funny about Meursault as well. He keeps on trying to be the innocent, the way that Jean-Paul Sartre is talking about him. Jean-Paul himself says that Meursault is innocent. How so? What the hell are you talking about? Maybe don't try and claim to be innocent or guilty, because you cannot be either if there's no morality to begin with. None of this makes sense. It's like they didn't think before they wrote things.
How the fuck is he supposed to be a representation of a person? None of them is saying that the absurdism is only permissible or only exists in the realm of theoretical. None of them say that this is not something that ever existed in reality. So they are basically telling us that it does exist in reality. What is good about this book about the outsider is that the syntax, the structure, the language, it makes a lot of sense to write that way when you talk about absurdism and trying to show experiences being separate islands. It is a very well-structured book in terms of specifically writing. We are now in a better position to understand the form of his narrative. Each sentence is like a present instant, but not an indecisive one that spreads like a stain to the following one. The sentence is sharp, distinct, and self-contained. The sentences in The Outsider are islands. We bounce from sentence to sentence, from void to void. Camus irons out the dialogue, summarizes it, renders it frequently as indirect discourse. He denies it any typographic privileges, so that a spoken phrase seems like any other happening. He consistently tries to push this idea that all experiences are equal, right? You know, even if he is a hedonist that doesn't really know it, staying at home and wasting a day being bored like he was on a Sunday that we witnessed in the book, it would be the exact same thing as wasting it on a bus going to his mother's home. And let's say the morality of the whole thing is not part of the question, which it isn't in absurdism in general. When he was looking for options of what to do, if he was genuinely looking for something new to do, or maybe not new, but more variety in what he's doing with his Sundays, he would do different things every Sunday. And sometimes those things would be going to see his mother. However, we are consistently shown in the book by his own interpretation of his life that this is kind of like a typical day, typical Sunday for him. There is a particular line in the book that explains this attitude of all experiences being the same, being equal, the problem of deciding of what to do, because you kind of think that both of them are the same. And that moment is exactly before he decides to walk back on the beach and go and kill somebody. So this is the moment that, honestly, again, fallacy upon fallacy. I went with him as far as the bungalow, and as he climbed the wooden steps, I just stood there at the bottom, my head ringing from the sun, unable to face the effort it would take to climb the wooden staircase and face the women again. But the heat was so intense that it was just as bad standing still in the blinding stream falling from the sky. To stay or to go, it amounted to the same thing. A minute later, I turned back towards the beach and started walking. You could stay at the bottom of the stairs where it's really hot and you don't want to be there, or you can climb the stairs, which you also don't want to do, and go face the women. The Arabs. This book is really something. Anyway, instead of choosing either or, he just decides to go back on the beach, which is even worse because he would be walking away from where he could get relief from the sun. And this is actually the only really relatable thing about Meursault, is how much the sun and heat affects him, because that's genuinely me, bitch. I cannot stand hot weather. So he starts walking, and the description of him walking afterwards is just like a description of him suffering, basically, because he hates doing it, but he keeps on doing it anyway. Then he sees the guy who his friend, in quotations, wanted to kill, and he just shoots him out of nowhere because the sun was really bright and it was annoying him, I guess. The most baffling thing about this is that he shoots him once and then he shoots him 4 more times after thinking about what he's done, which is like, okay. There is a prosecutor who basically says that there is a pattern to Meursault's behavior that shows that he's a bad man, which honestly, without, let's say we don't have to decide whether he's a bad man or a good man, he's definitely not an absurd man. Absurdism would require at least some level of discrepancy in his behavior in terms of his decisions, go to see his mother or not go to see his mother. He could have chosen to, I don't know, sit down on the stairs and just sit there, but he chooses destructive things all the time. He hasn't done anything good for anyone, which means that there is a pattern. You could do whatever you want as an absurdist and not feel guilt about any of the things that you do, because technically all of the experience and all the things that you do are all equals, yada yada yada. However, when we look at the last chapter, when Meursault is talking to a clergy or whatever the fuck they call him, basically some kind of priest or whatever, he addresses his own, view on the world and on mortality and everything. I was pouring out on him everything that was in my heart, cries of anger and cries of joy. He seemed so certain about everything, didn't he? He's thinking that about the priest, and how the priest basically believes in God and whatever, so he's saying like, oh, he was so certain about everything, wasn't he? And then literally not even like half a paragraph later, he goes, I had been right. I was still right. I was always right. I had lived my life one way and I could just as well have lived it another. I had done this and I hadn't done that. I hadn't done this, but I had done another. And so it was as if I had waited all this time for this moment and for the first light of this dawn to be vindicated. Nothing mattered, and I knew why. So did he. Saying this guy thinks he knows everything, and then immediately following it up with, well, I was always right. I'm always right. Yeah, I was right. It's something. It really is something. It is also followed up with, what would it matter if he were accused of murder and then executed because he didn't cry at his mother's funeral? That's not why. That's not why you're condemned. That's not why you're gonna be executed. You do remember that you killed somebody, right? Meursault is not shown rebelling at his death sentence. He was happy. No, he wasn't. He was in a perpetual state of moving from misery to happiness, from having no hope to having it again, to eventually arriving at wanting to start life over when close to death, which conceptually isn't really any different than being ready to be acquitted as like a miracle, basically, after thinking that there's no chance of it happening. It's the same thing. One of the most frustrating things about all this is that Camus and Sartre keep trying to push this idea that disorientation and the feeling of the absurd in the book come from issues that we have with Meursault's morality, more specifically societal expectations and not meeting them in terms of your reactions, in terms of your goodness or what is proper, what is acceptable, like not crying at his mother's funeral. But morality and societal norms are not synonymous with meaning of life. Yeah, I guess I did think that absurdism was kind of a description for how I felt about the universe, but turns out that it is too messy, inconsistent, and kind of silly, not grounded in reality and grounded in some kind of dimension that is made out of paper. It's not relevant to experiences of life that are actually visceral and potent and there and hit you right in the face. And my favorite note from the book, well, my note that I wrote down. Oh, to feel enough to be a hedonist, but not enough to be a person. Thank you to my patrons.